Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited that so many people have come to learn more about clean energy. My name is Delphine Van, and I support the Clean Energy Week organized by Energy Lab. Energy Lab is an organization established to support the growth of clean energy market in Cambodia. Before we start, I'd like to thank all the speakers today and Caroline from GGGI for hosting and moderating this event as part of the Clean Energy Week. Clean Energy Week is our annual festival, and it's about celebrating the opportunities clean energy can bring for Cambodia. More jobs, more investment, sustainable economic growth, lower electricity prices, and help Cambodia to be more energy independent. And this year, Clean Energy Week is an online campaign aiming at amplifying the message that clean energy is Cambodia's best choice for a stronger economy. It is happening now between the 21st until the 28th of October. But before the event today starts, I would like to play this video.
នៅប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងមានតម្រូវការថាមពលអគ្គិសនីយ៉ាងច្រើនសន្ធឹកសន្ធាប់ហើយតម្រូវការនេះកាន់តែមានសន្ទុះកើនឡើងប៉ុន្តែផែនការដើម្បីបំពេញតម្រូវការថាមពលនាថ្ងៃអនាគតអាចនឹងតម្រូវឲ្យផ្លាស់ប្ដូរតែនេះមានន័យយ៉ាងដូចម្តេចចំពោះប្រទេសកម្ពុជាហើយអ្វីទៅជាឱកាសធំបំផុតសម្រាប់សេដ្ឋកិច្ចប្រទេសកម្ពុជាកាលពីរដូវប្រាំងក្នុងឆ្នាំ2019ប្រទេសកម្ពុជាប្រឈមមុខនឹងវិបត្តិថាមពលអគ្គិសនីធំបំផុតដែលមិនធ្លាប់ជួបប្រទេសពីមុនមកហើយកម្ពុជាក៏បានស្វែងរកដំណោះស្រាយយ៉ាងឆាប់រហ័សដើម្បីធ្វើឲ្យប្រកាសថាវិបត្តិនេះនឹងមិនកើតសារជាថ្មីប្រទេសកម្ពុជាបានចុះហត្ថលេខាលើកិច្ចព្រមព្រៀងអនុវត្តគម្រោងរោងចក្រផលិតថាមពលដ៏ធំមួយដើម្បីទាញយកថាមពលអគ្គិសនីដែលអាចស្មើនឹង4ដងនៃអានុភាពថាមពលធ្យូងថ្មដែលកម្ពុជាបានកំពុងមានសប្តាហ៍ថ្ងៃគម្រោងថ្មីនេះរួមបញ្ចូលការទាញយកថាមពល 3.1 ហ្គីកាវ៉ាត់ពីរោងចក្រថាមពលអគ្គិសនីដែលដោយចំហេះធ្យូងថ្មនៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជានិងឡាវដែលនឹងផលិតថាមពលគួរទុកចិត្តបានសម្រាប់ពេលច្រើនឆ្នាំខាងមុខប៉ុន្តែកាលពីខែមុនលោកប្រធានាធិបតីស៊ីជីនពីងបានប្រកាសទៅកាន់មហាសន្និបាតអង្គការសហប្រជាជាតិថាចិននឹងមិនកសាងថាមពលអគ្គិសនីប្រើធ្យូងថ្មនៅបរទេសឡើយដោយសារតែក្តីបារម្ភចំពោះបរិស្ថានទន្ទឹមនឹងនេះគម្រោងថាមពលអគ្គិសនីដ៏ធំបំផុតរបស់កម្ពុជាក៏ជួបនឹងហានិភ័យ 75% នៃគម្រោងផ្គត់ផ្គង់ថាមពលរបស់កម្ពុជាត្រូវបានកសាងនិងផ្គត់ផ្គង់ដោយប្រទេសចិនតើយើងនឹងផ្ដល់ថាមពលស្របនឹងកំណើននៃតម្រូវការនេះដោយរបៀបណានេះប្រហែលមិនមែនជាបញ្ហាសម្រាប់ប្រទេសកម្ពុជាឡើយប៉ុន្តែវាគឺជាឱកាសដ៏ធំទៅវិញនៅពេលដែលគម្រោងធ្យូងថ្មនេះត្រូវបានចុះហត្ថលេខាភ្លាមៗនៅក្នុងឆ្នាំ2019នោះរាជរដ្ឋាភិបាលបានធ្វើឲ្យប្រកាសថាគ្រប់គ្នាអាចប្រើប្រាស់ថាមពលអគ្គិសនីដោយគ្រប់គ្រាន់ប៉ុន្តែឥឡូវនេះគម្រោងធ្យូងថ្មទាំងនេះប្រហែលមិនអាចដំណើរការទៅមុខបានទៀតទេហើយកម្ពុជាពិតជាអាចបង្កើតជម្រើសដែលប្រសើរជាងនេះជំនួសមកវិញយើងអាចបង្កើនការទាញយកថាមពលអគ្គិសនីក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាប្រចាំខែជាជាងទាញយកជាប្រចាំឆ្នាំដោយការបង្កើតថាមពលសូឡានិងថាមពលខ្យល់នៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាផ្ទាល់និងថ្លឹងថ្លែងវាជាមួយនឹងអាគុយដែលដំណើរការលឿនក៏ដូចជាម៉ាស៊ីនហ្គាសក្នុងរូបភាពទូទៅយើងអាចសន្សំសំចៃថវិកាហើយយើងអាចបង្កើតវាប្រចាំតំបន់ហើយយើងក៏អាចបង្កើតការងារបន្ថែមសម្រាប់ប្រជាជនខ្មែរផងដែរមានន័យថាប្រទេសកម្ពុជាក្លាយជាប្រទេសដែលមានភាពឯករាជ្យច្រើនជាងមុនដោយមិនត្រូវការពឹងផ្អែកលើប្រទេសដទៃសម្រាប់ថាមពលដ៏ច្រើនលើសលប់នោះតែនេះអាចជាឱកាសដើម្បីឲ្យយើងគិតសារជាថ្មីអំពីអនាគតថាមពលរបស់ប្រទេសកម្ពុជាទេតែនេះអាចជាពេលវេលាដើម្បីឲ្យកម្ពុជាឆ្ពោះទៅរកការប្រើប្រាស់ថាមពលសូឡានិងថាមពលខ្យល់សម្រាប់សន្តិសុខថាមពលសេដ្ឋកិច្ចកាន់តែរឹងមាំនិងអនាគតដែលល្អប្រសើរទេដើម្បីស្វែងយល់ព័ត៌មានបន្ថែមសូមចូលទៅកាន់ Clean Energy Week 2021
If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to type them in the chat and we will respond to them after the presentation. Once again, thank you so much for joining Clean Energy Week and remember to visit our Facebook and share our post too with the hashtag #ILoveCleanEnergy. And now I would like to hand it over to Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delphine. Very nice video to introduce the week and the topic of today. And this panel is, of course, dedicated to the question of decarbonizing the industrial sector and the industrial supply chains in Cambodia. So the industrial sector here represents more than 30% of GDP. The vast majority of that is garment production. Garment sector represents 65% of all export earnings, 800,000 jobs, and that means a few million Cambodians depend on the sector for their livelihoods. So the economic stakes are massive. Garment buying brands are facing pressure to decarbonize, pressure from consumers, from investors, from regulators. So what we've seen in the past few years is that these brands have been signing up for all sorts of international platforms and initiatives, such as the RE100, which commits its signatories to sourcing 100% of its electricity from renewables by 2050. There are the science-based targets, there's the UN fashion charters, there are plenty of initiatives that have pushed these brands to set ambitious emission reduction targets. That means essentially that decarbonization is essential to the competitiveness and growth of Cambodia as an industrial production center. According to our own estimates at GGGI, maximizing resource efficiency in the sector can reduce greenhouse gas emissions with 17%, and sourcing from solar is, of course, an important part of that. This would drive productivity, cut costs, and create jobs. It's really one of those situations where economic interest and environmental interest align, and that is the beauty of this topic. Now, we are, of course, speaking in the context of a global pandemic. In 2020, the sector had to deal with supply chain disruptions and demand shocks and shrank by almost 7% due to COVID-19. Around 110 garment factories were closed, leaving more than 55,000 workers unemployed. And the sector is still reeling from that shock. This year, we anticipate a positive growth of only 1.6%. So it will take a few years to recover from the beating that the Cambodian garment sector has taken. Now, with what we know about the links between clean energy, productivity, and competitiveness, how can clean energy contribute to the recovery of the garment sector in Cambodia? What are the barriers and what are the opportunities? We've brought together a few businesses who can talk to that. So that brings me to introducing our panelists today. We have among us Peter Ford. Pete is the environmental sustainability specialist at H&M Group here. The group has ambitious environmental targets. Pete will tell us all about those. And in view of these, H&M Group has been one of the more vocal advocates for clean energy in Cambodia in recent years. And we are happy to have Pete on the panel with us today. Then we have Richard Pullen. Richard is the regional sales director at TotalEnergies. And TotalEnergies is, of course, a leading international oil and gas company, but it is also a solar energy operator. Richard leads the solar team in Cambodia and the region, and we look forward to hearing from him what can be done in Cambodia to scale up clean energy for commercial and industrial use. And then we have Rogier van Mansveld. Rogier is the business development manager for renewables at Comin Khmere, an engineering solutions provider working in infrastructure, in industry, and in construction. Thank you very much, Rogier, for making time for us today. My name is Caroline Cazardier. I am the country representative of GGGI here in Cambodia. GGGI is an intergovernmental agency providing policy and investment advice relating to green growth. We work on clean energy solutions across the globe in our 41 member countries. And in Cambodia, we run the EU-funded Switch Garment project together with the NGO GERES and the Garment Manufacturing Association of Cambodia. And that's a project that is focused on promoting clean energy solutions in garment manufacturing. So with that introduction made, I think we can move on to our panel discussion. And I'd like to throw a few questions at our eminent panelists, and then of course we will open the floor to participants to also engage in this discussion. And I would like to address a first question to H&M. Pete, can you tell us a bit more about what H&M hopes to achieve And how do you incentivize your factories, your supplying factories, to decarbonize? We are, of course, dealing with economically embattled factories with thin margins. How does H&M accompany these suppliers in their transition?
Thank you. Thanks for that lovely introduction. So yeah, hi everyone. From H&M Group, obviously large fashion brand. We've long worked in Cambodia and have very strong global commitments now on environment. So it's shining lights that we work around are our 2030 target of being climate neutral. And that involves sourcing 100% renewable electricity across our supply chain and also cutting our GHG emissions by 50% from our 2017 baseline. So those are the two big actions to reach our 2030 target. And then all of that plays a role in our 2040 target of being climate positive. So quite ambitious goals, and some of them are ahead of some of the countries in which we operate. So keeping us all very busy and working closely then with our factories and our suppliers. So all of these targets that we have follow the Science Based Targets Initiative and our goal of keeping our actions across our supply chain that will limit global warming to 1.5 degrees as well. So all of these are science-based. It's not just dreaming of big numbers. And you know, how are we doing this and how is this moving? So last year in Cambodia, for example, none of our supplying factories had any rooftop solar, despite all of the hard work of everyone within the H&M family and all of the rest of the industry as well. By Christmas this year, we will have 4 factories with rooftop solar, and by Christmas next year, that number could be 10. So not only are our calls to decarbonize vocal and active and very frequent, as anyone within Cambodia I'm sure can attest, but also now we're having traction and we are getting that input from the suppliers with which we work. And the question, how do we incentivize or how do we work here? So all of our suppliers are well aware of our 2030 targets and goals and requirements. To continue working with H&M after 2030, all of these have to be met. And so the sooner that factories invest and take on board some of these initiatives, the more money that they can save. Return on investment for a rooftop solar project on a factory in Cambodia can be, let's say 5 years. The others on the panel might be able to offer a little bit more nuance to that, but let's say 5 years, which means that's 15 years of saving money. And that can be really significant amounts of cash in a country like Cambodia, where electricity is really expensive. So that is one way to help motivate factories. We're also then helping them with energy efficiency projects. How can they reduce their total energy consumption and therefore save more money as well? And that's where things like the EU Switch program comes in, Unidos Test and others. And we are getting active working with them on that and really pushing that and those savings. So yeah, really, I mean, that's how do you motivate? The advantage of energy is you can motivate people with it because it will save you money. It's harder, with things like water and waste management to get people as excited. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Thank you very much, Pete. Very, very interesting. I'll address my next question to Rogier. Rogier, can you tell us a bit more about how the regulatory context is shaping up? And do you see barriers on that front that remain to be addressed to facilitate the decarbonization of industrial supply chains?
Yes, I think you stopped my video if you want to see me talk. Somebody blocked me. Yeah, this may be slightly better. Yes, hello. So yeah, for the regulation, a few years ago, there wasn't any regulations. At that time, we installed quite a few systems at Coca-Cola, ISPP. But yeah, many clients were actually not sure if they want to install. So at that time, we were quite happy that there was some regulation and which was actually reasonable, okay. It was a bit in favor of companies that run 24/7, like hotels and hospitals and some cement factories. Later, Electricity Authority came with a slightly better solution, which was okay, but then during Christmas, 1.5 years ago, almost 2 years ago, the ministry just said if you have solar, you cannot benefit from the day and night tariff. So at one go, all the hospitals and cement factories that installed solar got a big negative. So that was a bit strange. Later, it was also came out that even if you installed before the regulation, you still had to follow the regulation. So for a few installations such as ISPP, they have quite a big issue. If the standards would be related to safety or something, there would of course be no problem to later install additional devices, but to really change the regulation based on 50% of your capacity charge is very difficult for companies and schools that have installed before that regulation was into place. So that makes Cambodia very insecure for investors. And you probably know that clean tech finds a lot more opportunities in markets such as Vietnam and Thailand. So Cambodia is really quite far behind. Luckily, there is still an opportunity for companies that operate during the day. There is still a saving. If you invest, your return on investment would probably go from around 4 years to around 6-7 years, which is for a country like Cambodia not very easy. For Europe, I think a little bit longer because the loans are also much lower. The 6-7 years is quite reasonable, but in Cambodia, you see that really companies are looking for 3-4 years investment. So if it goes to around 7 years, it is very difficult. And I think also companies that provide a lease or finance systems, their margins are really trying to get very tight. So we are still very happy that there are a few investors like Total and others that are still supporting this market. But it's not an easy way. The other thing, and maybe Peter later can answer a bit of that, we see that many of the garment factories don't have strong enough roofs. So we really need to do a lot of pre-qualification. So that is quite difficult. It adds quite often a lot to the projects, which makes them not feasible anymore. So there would be maybe good if companies like H&M could maybe give us slightly something extra or something to make that work, because we are really quite fighting also with to making the prices within range. Unfortunately, recently also the prices of solar panels have increased about almost 30% over the last 6-7 months. So that is really also quite a burden on getting the projects within pricing range. Maybe a little bit more about the regulation. Initially, the idea was that the capacity charge would be used for the solar companies, and then later for the companies that install solar, and then a few months later for all companies. But that actually never came through. And the next 2 years, it is expected there that there is no change. So it makes a very unfair playing field between the capacity charge that is levied on companies that install solar and companies that don't have to pay for the capacity charge, especially because there's also this 50% rule. If you have a company, I visited a quite large company recently. They had a small roof. They wanted to install maybe 400 or 300 kilowatt solar, but that doesn't work because their load is around 4 or 5 megawatts constantly. So if they would go over to the capacity charge, they basically would lose. So with the European Chamber of Commerce and the Green Biz Committee. We're also seeing if we could do a little bit of lobbying, maybe to see if capacity charge could only be charged on actually the AC output from the solar. That would make it much more fair. So companies could also install a smaller system, because now we need to really calculate that with the 50% rule and the capacity charge, that it's if you have like a 1 megawatt load, you probably have to install something around 700-800 kilowatt solar. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. You cannot install a small system, which is very, very weird. So especially now for the 24-hour companies that run 24 hours with a similar night and day load, it is not beneficial at all to install solar. The Phnom Penh hospital, it's really a big bugger for them, because they really, in Thailand, they get big benefits and they're really looking into extending. But in Cambodia, they're really penalized because of this new tariff. So that really hurts the image, although they really try to do it. So there is a base configuration, but it seems that the enabling environment is not very much supportive. And in a country that's, when you look at the speech of the Ministry of Environment and in SEN and in international climate change negotiations, they are very beneficial. But in the implementation for rooftop solar, which is very beneficial because you also need to install less transformer, less cables if there is growth. It would be very good to actually separate and have more smaller systems. And of course, also some larger systems that are great. I have nothing against that initially, but they're also more disruptive. If there's a cloud on the big 40 megawatt system, you lose at once 40 megawatt. Or if you have 400 or 500 kilowatt systems at many different locations, your disruptive capacity is also much less. So yeah, we are actually, in generally, we're quite happy also with the support from EDC when you're officially in the market. You can get your permissions to help, but yeah, you end up paying quite a bit extra for installing solar. We understand that there should be, or could be maybe a small charge, which is relative to the loss of EDCs, but they actually should then cover the loss and not necessarily the total amount. So we're trying to go forward. It's okay, but yeah, Cambodia could benefit much more if they would actually slightly change the regulation. But unfortunately, I think with the current ministry and EDC and EAC, we don't expect that much is going to happen. Sorry, Caroline, you are on mute. You have to unmute yourself. I thought I lost the internet, but yeah.
Apologies. So I was saying, yes, we're hearing from Pete, clean energy saves you money. We're hearing from Rogier, well, it's not that straightforward. There are a few complications between installing solar and cutting those costs. So that brings me to Richard. What type of business and service models can help make solar more attractive, in particular for industrial clients? I know Total works with leasing contracts, for example. What is the advantage of that?
Okay, thank you, Caroline, and thanks for inviting me. So everybody be aware of Total through our gas stations by Total Cambodia. But what most people are not aware of is that we are one of the largest solar operators in the world. So we've been involved in solar for over 50 years. So it's not a quick knee-jerk reaction to go green. We've installed, and I had to check this before I came on, 20 gigawatts of solar around the world. So we're a serious player in this industry and across all continents. So 4 years ago, we looked at the Cambodian market and we analysed where we could add value to, where can Total use its expertise, use its strengths to add value. And we looked at utilities, residential, and we chose on the commercial and industrial sector. And we chose to do that with our leasing model. So what does that mean? What is a leasing model? So basically, it's the OPEX model. So we design, we install, we commission, and we operate a solar system on a factory or assembly plant's roof at our cost. So we invest 100% of the investment ourselves, and then we enter into a long-term agreement with the customer. So the customers put zero money in, they buy their energy from us at a lower than grid price. So there's economic savings for the customer, and then there's also the reduction in carbon footprint as well. So we set up 4 years ago. We had some initial issues with the regulations. I won't deny that. We've installed, so last year we did about 7 megawatts. We're going to install about 7.5 megawatts this year. So we're in COVID. I think there's pretty strong numbers. It's not quite where we want it to be, but I think it's growing. So every year we see the demand growing. We see that. We don't concentrate on, I know you spoke about factories and Roger did, but we're not just concentrating on the garment and footwear side of things. We look across the board. So actually one of our biggest sort of sectors has been the agricultural sector, which everybody thought it would be impossible, but we work with it. The regulations are there, we cannot deny that, and we work with those regulations. So we think that Cambodia is growing. I think we can see an increase in our solar. I totally agree with Roger and Peter. It's a very difficult market. There's lots of content. That's why we spend a lot of time at the beginning of a contract or beginning of a project to analyze exactly what is the customer's, what is the load, how much solar can they fit on, is their roof, do they have the space on their roof, and is it going to be strong enough to adopt solar? So we look at that. If it's not going to work, we tell them very much right at the beginning, it's not going to work for you under our model. It may work if they want to buy it, but that's up to them. So we're very open on that. It's a difficult market. We see, you talk about return on investment, but if you're not investing, you don't get a return. But we can see anywhere between factories saving almost 20% of their annual yearly cost, which is a huge number. That's quite rare. Normally it may be between the sort of 10%. So the savings are there on most factories. Again, totally, as Roger was saying, it depends on your configuration. If you're a 24-hour place, then it's not probably going to work. But we're looking at it across the board. We look across all sectors and take everyone on its face value. So we see Cambodia being, I manage other countries, and where India, where we do high volumes, low margins. Cambodia is a difficult market. It is good. We're happy to be here. There's not a lot of competition, if I'm honest with you. So, we're not the only ones, but a lot of them have just given up because it's just too difficult to do. Total's been in Cambodia for 27 years, so we're not giving up. We're here to stay, and we're pretty positive on the solar environment at the moment in Cambodia, and we expect it to grow next year. As Peter said, 4 factories this year, maybe 10 next year. We want to be very much part of that. So we see it we're looking at it quite positive. It could be better, but it could be a lot worse as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Richard. I think we all started touching on the investment motivations for the factories and Rogier, you mentioned some of the complications. What are the financial solutions currently in place for factories who want to invest in solar? Is there typically a capacity to self-invest? Is there a need for third-party financial solutions? Are these available in Cambodia right now?
Sorry, you have somebody specific, or you were asking me, or?
That was for you, Rogier.
Okay, yeah. So I think there are quite a few companies that invest themselves, such as the American Embassy, ISPP. I think, I'm actually not really sure. I think also the Canadian International School, but I think they have a deal with the Japanese. Actually, ISPP also got 50% paid by the Japanese carbon deal. The CIS, I think, had a similar deal where they only, they got, if they are using some Japanese technology, they actually could get 50% or 40% for carbon deals, which is quite interesting because yeah, there's quite a lot of money. If you really calculate the carbon credits, they are normally only a few $100s per year. So on a few $100,000 projects, the carbon savings are very small. Unfortunately, with solar, I remember I was working with the cook stoves, and you could earn maybe $16 per year per cook stove, which was only about $3. So you get like 4 or 5 times the carbon credits back per cook stove. But for solar, the carbon credits were very low. I think there is a market that it could be help some savings, because that would of course be very good if there would be yeah, some offset possible, that companies get a little bit of benefit also financial for their carbon savings. I think that would be very interesting. I don't know if GGGI is looking into that to help these companies to maybe use that money for roof structuring or something to make the projects a bit more financially viable, because yeah, we're really on the, what I mentioned, on the branch. And then we just signed also 1.1 megawatt with Laurels and Diamonds. They go for the third phase. They also self-invest. So there are some companies that are really leading and have the money. I think if you look at the financing, of course, it is most interesting if you have the money yourself. But you see that many companies, also like Coca-Cola, they don't want to really bother taking care of it, because yeah, if you install it yourself, you have to take care of it. If it doesn't work, you have to maybe clean it yourself. And of course, the great thing with these lease companies, they need to make sure that over 15, 12, 10 years, the systems get their money. So they make sure it is cleaned, it is taken care of, it is safe. So also the safety standards of Total, because they are an oil company, their safety standards are really, really high, which is also applied to the solar system. So if we go on the roof, we need to make sure that everything is safe. So yeah, that's quite a bit benefits, although your financial benefits are maybe not as high, but then you don't need to invest and you get a green image with some extra savings as well. I think also there's still always an issue with the solar is that your benefits are coming back after 10 or 7, 8 or 10 years or 15 years. I think the Total deal is also very good because you really own the system after your lease is finished. But yeah, if you're a garment factory and you have a 2 years deal with making shoes or something, it is very difficult to have this horizon of 10 or 15 years. So that is why companies that have, yeah, that might not be sure if they get an order in 2 years, they might not want to invest, and they also have difficulty signing this longer contract. That's a quite, so it would be really great if, for instance, maybe there's a security from the Cambodian government that in case the company would get bankrupt, that maybe the EDC would take over the contract buying power at 7 cents or something. Maybe that would also help some other yeah, these constructions to have a little bit a lower burden on the companies, that in case the company go out, EDC will work with maybe a slightly less higher margin, but at least to save. So I think it would be good if there would be some more backup, maybe. IFC used to do something like that through banks. With the bank financing, it's been very difficult because the interest rates are still around 7 to 10%. And with that amount of interest rate over a 7-year period, you earn nothing back. It is not really feasible. So there you really need to, if you're being the 3-4 years payback time, it's probably could be possible. Like ISPP, they used to have a loan, some leftover loan from the Maybank, so they could use that actually to invest in the solar themselves. But yeah, the investment models are quite difficult. But you see, yeah, you see the really some leading clients, also our own office. We actually promoted that RMA saw that they have some benefits. So we have installed 100 kilowatt on our office, which is around 30%. And that's really also quite good. Also with the, maybe just with the tariff, it used to be quite interesting. You still see at ISPP, they're actually paying way too high. They pay still 18 cents. Although officially they should only be paying 15 cents. So if they shift over to the capacity charge, they will start to pay 15 cents, which their saving is a little bit better. But officially they already should be able to pay lower. But many clients pay actually a way too high tariff. And if you tell EDC, say, oh, we're not aware of it. And oh, yeah, you can change it if you want. But one of the big clients that used to pay way too much for years is the airport. Yeah, they paid actually a tariff that is for low distribution, and actually they have a high voltage connection themselves. There are also a few companies that are not aware of the day and night tariff, and they're paying also way too much. So you really have to tell EDC and be a bit keen on the tariffs that are proposed. Yeah, so that is basically the difference in the options for CapEx and lease systems.
Interesting. I think you've given us a lot there to think about. I'm hearing, yeah, guarantees through EDC. I'm hearing maybe there's room for concessional finance to make bank lending more attractive. We are indeed at GGGI looking at carbon finance as an option, together with Sweden, who would be interested in buying credits from clean energy in manufacturing. And then it's more a matter of looking at integrated interventions around energy efficiency, solar and others, and seeing if carbon finance from Sweden could make that more attractive for certain factories. You also mentioned, yeah, the investment horizon. So linking that back to what we were discussing with Pete earlier, if the can brands help Pete in getting a longer investment horizon, for example, by committing to buying contracts that run over a few years, so that the factories are ensured that whichever green investments they are making pay off in terms of purchasing contracts. Is that a way that H&M would consider incentivizing a switch to green energy?
Thanks, Caroline. So, sorry, it's very bright. There we go. Within H&M, there's two ways that we measure the sustainability improvements at a factory. One is the HIG-FEM module, which is the environment component of the industry standard measurement, and that includes a score given to factories both on their air quality but also on their energy management systems and their energy efficiency. And so we work with factories to improve that score, and one way to do that is to install solar. Also internally within H&M we have something called the Sustainability Index, and that also gives scores to factories. One metric is on just how energy efficient they are overall, and a second metric is how much they improve on this efficiency year on year. And so both the Sustainability Index score and the HIG-FEM score combined give us an appreciation of how sustainably minded a factory is. And only if they are showing clear improvements on sustainability can they then have the potential either for longer term contracts with us or higher value goods or larger orders. So if a factory that we work with is demonstrating sustainability improvement, and that would be rooftop solar as one big step, then yes, there are ways that we can help, and it's only through that action that they will even qualify for this these extra support. So they have to demonstrate success and motivation first. We're also, as a company, looking at other ways to help. And yeah, I don't think we have any stories in Cambodia to share on this yet, but whether it's helping with loans or acting as a guarantee on contracts, there are potentials moving forward there. But again, to go back to some of the others that have commented, almost no garment factories in Cambodia have a night shift, and so that helps with then the tariffs and the impact there. So most are cut, and so units run during the day. So garment factories potentially look more attractive than others because they don't have that night shift penalization. Yeah, as has been mentioned in the past, obviously roof quality is a different issue. Some of the older buildings need a lot of help. So newer garment factories working during the day can be really quite attractive with ROI. And by demonstrating investment in solar, yeah, there are ways that H&M can then further support.
Great. And can you see your supplier in Cambodia starting to play the environment card as a strategy in competing with factories in other countries, for example? How well are Cambodian factories positioning themselves compared to other garment producing countries? And is the environmental argument, does it weigh up against other arguments, such as, for example, the cost of labor? Or
for sure. So, I mean, traditionally, the garment sector was always about cost and speed. Sustainability is now, yeah, an equal third column there in how we are moving forward and working again to all of our big commitments and goals that we have. So in Cambodia, as I said, last year we had 0 factories with rooftop solar. By Christmas this year, we'll have 4. So that it feels like that critical mass has started to shift within Cambodia. Again, if we can double that or triple that by Christmas next year, then it's easier to demonstrate. But it really feels like those in Cambodia that are prioritizing sustainability, whether to unlock that potential from the H&M side, or whether just to compete amongst themselves. I mean, a lot of factories now are making their own sustainability reports. They are competing amongst each other to attract brands that appreciate that, and that will reward that as well. So feels like this is, the shift has started. That's within Cambodia. And then in other production markets, very much so. I mean, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the rooftop solar there is really taking off. Turkey, very much as well. Vietnam has been slower than anticipated, but clearly lots of room there for then rapid growth, I think, moving forward, even with the feed-in tariff having been taken away from Vietnam, it's still attractive. I think, as I said earlier, H&M, the factories that we source from will need to be using 100% renewable electricity by 2030. So if a country has a browning energy grid, such as Cambodia's, the factories then have to find alternative means to ensure that their electricity is sustainable. And that can currently only happen through rooftop solar. There are no virtual power purchase agreements that are available, such as Vietnam is piloting, such as India is rolling out. So it's really up to the factories themselves to find a solution for renewable electricity. And yeah, we are very excited that more and more are installing solar. So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. I want to ask Richard, how do you see that in your line of work? I know you also develop business in the region in other countries, and how would you say Cambodia compares and positions itself compared to other countries in the region when it comes to solar development?
I think what we see, the big difference in Cambodia is, so outside of Cambodia, all of our contracts are 20, 25 years. So they get a lower price per kilowatt hour, but over a long term. In Cambodia, that is really, really rare. I think we've done one project that's sort of over that. Very much here, they want short term, they want to pay more. Obviously, they're going to have to pay more over a shorter term, but it's a lease to own system. So they get the ownership on maybe year 11. And therefore, they're not paying us anymore. So there's a lot of tail end savings. it's kind of, we're about the only country in the region that really, we're concentrating now on, say, 10 years, 15 years is probably the sweet spot, I think, with the lower costs and savings. But we give the options to the customers. It's up to them how they want to do it. It depends if they're an MNC or a Cambodian-owned company. There's a lot of decisions. We'd like to give them as many options as we can and let them choose how they want to go. Just sort of go back to sort of the business model that came up earlier. I mean, the reason we chose the lease model is that because of Total's size. So one of the things, we're a very large company, one of the biggest in Europe. We're not going to the bank and borrowing money to invest. So we have so we're not have to see a return on investment in 3 years or something. We have that, we 100% use our own money and we can wait until our returns are correct. So we definitely see Cambodia, it's a different market, it's a difficult market. There's a little bit of lack of confidence in the regulations, which is troubling. We want the regulations to come out, the new time reviews to come out, to be announced for all. I think at the moment, there's still, it should be released next year, but until it is, it's slightly difficult. That doesn't give a lot of factories confidence because they don't know what their energy bills are going to be next year, and that's a horrible spot for them. So we'd like that to be, so that is the one part of the regulations we're very pushing for, is just to get them out. They're not correct, they're not perfect, we know that. But Rome wasn't built in a day. So 4 years ago, when we looked at Cambodia, there wasn't any regulation. So we've got some, they're getting better, and they will get better in time, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be perfect straight away. So we do see that side of it. On an investment side, we're happy with it. We're in a very fortunate position because we're part of Total, so we can piggyback we have a very small team in Cambodia, but I have 150 people that if I want to go upstairs, I can get my HR done and all of those things. So we're in a very fortunate position on that. But we also have to work hard for it as well. So, the market is there. It is growing. Roof is definitely an issue on some of the older garment factories that we do run into. And there's also other issues like credit that we've had issues with as well. So obviously, if we're investing $1 million in somebody's on somebody's rooftop, we need to know we're going to get paid, and we need to have those securities as well. So these are sort of issues that we have to deal with. We have the same processes we do in every single country. So we know what we're doing. We're very much keyed in and know exactly what we're doing, and we're quite confident on Cambodia on its way forward. I think there's a lot of good pressure coming from the brands as well. So in the apparel and footwear side, we've had a lot of work on that this year. We've had relative success, not as much as I would like, but we've had some success on that, and I expect that to be much more next year. But it's a lot of it's going to be for next year will be the regulations when they come in, what they come in at. I expect if they do happen January, February, then it's going to be a big game changer for solar, rooftop solar in Cambodia.
We also have some questions around the regulation in the chat box that I want to pick up while we're at it. Can you unpack a bit further what the regulation requires, and in particular, can smaller companies install solar? And does that make sense for a smaller company in the current setting? Rogier, do you want to give that question a shot?
Yeah, I quickly answered it already. Basically, the official regulation says that you need to have a transformer of 250 kVA. If you have that, then you can install solar. I believe you can have a little bit smaller transformer as well. But if you just have a three-phase connection with the shared connection, it's not official and it's not that easy. There are quite a lot of people that actually want to install the solar, but they have difficulties getting to the regulation. There are quite a lot of very small systems that people put themselves, and there is a risk that EDC just says you have to turn it off. But it also is happening, and many people doing it. So there's no regulation for the. So it says the regulation is for below 250 kilowatts, but below there's basically no regulation. So if you want to have approval, it is not that easy. EDC seems to turn a blind eye to some of those installations, but in some provinces where rural electrification enterprises are active and they just don't like it, they could just say that you have to turn it off. And that is quite a bit of a bugger if you installed quite some money and then you risk that you are disconnected from the grid. I think there was also a question related to the batteries. Currently, the solar price is around 15 cents. So if you install solar, you can save around 30%, which the cost is probably maybe around 6, 7, 8 cents, a little bit more, depending a bit on the size. If you want to install batteries, you have to install double. The cost of the batteries are almost the same as the solar system. So for the battery price is also going down quite a bit. So it could also be that quite soon you could actually go totally off grid if you have enough roof and use the batteries, which I think is not a smart move. I think EDC should actually, or the electricity authority should enable and support people to put some batteries, maybe a few to stabilize, maybe 10% at some. The inverters and all the technology is very advanced. It is really ready to be connected to a system of the national grid to actually balance all the output. I think there's also maybe some, I think UNDP is also looking into that, and Ministry of Finance, if you maybe should think of separating generation and distribution, not anymore under one entity. To I think in Thailand you have that as well. Yeah, EDC has done a great job over the last 12 years, but yeah, maybe they are a bit too powerful. But you know, it's always difficult if you get very powerful to split it up. But that is something that then, yeah, Ministry of Finance is also 50% ownership of EDC, and they really, it would till now, yeah, EDC and the Ministry of Energy have been really looking into how it could benefit the energy sector, specifically also benefit EDC, and maybe not so much how, for instance, if a household installs 3-4 kilowatts, how much that actually will reduce foreign investments and generate power on a local level and generate more benefit for Cambodian people themselves. So it would be very interesting to look also how, for instance, yeah, smaller systems could benefit the average income of average Cambodian people, because that should be the end game. Because it's not that interesting if there are large foreign corporations earn most of the money of these projects. So that's, I used to say that you have my beer, my country, and maybe you can also have my sun, my solar. That actually Cambodians generate some of their own power. Instead of a new motorbike, you can put some small solar system on your roof. Of course, there's also safety issues and there's lots of things, but that they always can be overcome. And I think it would be great to create more markets, especially also for the smaller companies, because you see that the smaller solar companies, they're really, fighting, and they have a difficult position because they're really moving in this kind of not clear legal environment, which is very, very complex. So there's basically, it's your own risk, and maybe you need to see how you could get from the grid and generate, just be totally sufficient yourself. But then you might need to also save some more energy, use less aircon, and reduce your energy consumption. Yeah, so that is the regulation. That's a clear, and it's not very clear in a kind of vague environment currently.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, we're getting some very good questions in the chat. So I want to encourage everyone, don't hesitate to throw your question in or raise your hand. if you want to make some comments. I see we're already getting my solar, my country in the chat box. I think as a tagline, it's catching on. And yeah, while we give people a chance to think about their questions and formulate their questions, I want to ask Pete. Yeah, Rogier started touching upon the social side of this story, and yes, before this panel discussion, I was browsing H&M's website. Has some very interesting reports and statements around sustainability, of course. And so the website says that H&M Group likes to think of sustainability as something we do rather than something we simply say. Our vision is for all our operations to be run in a way that is sustainable, economically, socially, and environmentally. So how do you at H&M reconcile those different agendas? Can we make the same environmental demands on least developed countries as we do on more advanced industrial countries? Or should we differentiate between countries in view of their capacities to ensure a socially just transition? Pete.
Thank you. So, yeah, I think H&M Group works with about 14 production countries around the world, Europe, Africa, and Asia. And so, obviously, that's quite a range and a scale of local laws, local requirements, and local environmental standards. But H&M Group has a single guiding light, and again, it's this 2030 climate neutral, 2040 climate positive. And so, yeah, we work very closely. The team that we have here and in Vietnam and in, everywhere that we works very closely both with factories to see where they can find energy savings or environment savings or water, how they can connect with stakeholders, with third parties to do all this work. We also then actively work at the government level, in public affairs, both raising to local partners in the government that these are H&M's requirements and needs globally around things, especially around greener energy grids and that kind of thing. And then in Cambodia, it's going to be around PPA frameworks and REC frameworks as well moving forward, highlighting how important these are to industries and to brands with sustainability commitments. It's not, it works differently in different markets. There's different needs in different markets, but overall, it's understood, I think, that sustainability goals also then help with local environment protection and quality of life for citizens in the countries in which we operate and workers in the factories with which we source from. So I don't see a paradox here, and I really think it goes together. Obviously, we support brands such as H&M in Cambodia, and we've been here for a long time. And our sustainability commitments are quite clearly communicated. But we're not the only ones with such commitments, and other brands and other companies also have these commitments. And if the government of Cambodia, for example, is looking at ways both to work with us on what we need already inside Cambodia, but also then what can attract other companies into Cambodia, which then brings jobs, investments, and growth. It is because of the DPPA, which is the Power Purchase Agreement framework in Vietnam, that companies such as Foxconn, who make products for Apple, that was a considerable reason why they moved production into Vietnam, because this renewable energy framework and pilot was on the books and encouraged business. So it's not necessarily a challenge between what we want and what governments can do and everything else, but it's finding that way to really explain why the commitments exist from a brand perspective, where things can be arranged to meet those requirements at a country level, and the clear benefits from doing so. And there's a lot of finance coming out of Europe now, on the just transition and on building back better and greener. The development partners in Cambodia do a lot of work helping the Cambodian governments, energy efficiency work, such as EU Switch, with money from the European Union. US aid is very active. The Australians are very active. The French. So I don't see this as an us versus them. We're all in this together. There is only one planet, and we have to find a way to keep global warming below terrible temperatures that are predicted if no one does anything. Yeah.
Thank you, Pete, for a candid response. Getting quite a few questions in the chat box now. I hope I'm not failing to keep up with them. One of our participants is asking about solar waste from solar panels. Are there any solutions in place for that? Maybe I will throw this one at Rogier again.
Yeah, I believe in Australia, where there's a huge solar market, there is already quite a bit of quite a few companies that use solar panels for recycling. I'm not sure if Richard, do you have any total policy on?
Yeah, I can't talk on the manufacturing. I don't know on that side of it, but I can say on our projects, all of our solar modules are recyclable. So at the end of their life cycle, we send them off to a European registered company that recycles the silica. So that's something that we build into our contracts. So that I can comment on, that we do take care of that side. I'm sure we take care of the manufacturing side as well, but I don't have that information. So certainly on the recycling, on the end of life of a solar module, the silica is still relatively valuable and it needs to be recycled. It's not like metal, you just put it in a big and crush it. It's a lot more complicated than that. I think as silica prices go up, there'll be a lot more demand going into that. At the moment, there's very few companies that can do it. So we use a company that's registered out of Germany, but I feel there'll be a lot more people going into that space as the prices increase. So, but I can't talk on the manufacturing. That's sorry.
I think this is a topic that comes up quite often when we discuss solar panels. It is still a relatively new technology, so that the solar panel recycling technology is growing and is scaling up. And as the installation of solar increases, then there'll be more product with which that needs to be recycled. I think from what I've seen and understood, the market for recycling panels is growing just as quickly as the market for installing panels. So I don't see it as, an issue moving forward. As again, panels last 20, 30 years. We're installing a lot more now than we did 20 or 30 years ago. So I think that recycling market will exist just at the right time that we need it to.
Thanks, Pete. Then we have a question around the agenda for EDC and EAC also. I think why are they putting those regulations in place, the 50% cap, capacity payment, the issues around the nighttime tariff, the approvals, and what is the solution that we could offer these government entities? How can we make solar more attractive for them? I think, Rogier, you started answering that question, but I'd love to address it verbally also.
Yeah, I used to work before with the World Bank, where we also were advising the ministry. Of course, they always kind of go their own way, but sometimes some people seem to listen and do something very good. There used to be the same what you have now for lithium battery, around 25% import tax on solar, and then another 10% VAT. So you ended up 35 or maybe even was 45% import tax in total. That was reduced to 7%. And interestingly now, it's officially still 7%, But if you import from China, you can get this certificate of origin, so you pay 0% tax, which is really quite amazing. So sometimes something happens. With European Chamber of Commerce, with GreenBiz, we've been trying to set up negotiations with EAC. EAC initially seemed to listen quite well, but there's still a very strong network with the SWISEM together with EDC that basically dictates anything that they think is important for them. And they just have a feeling that solar rooftop is not beneficial to them. So they just don't like it. So I don't think that there's going to change much unless it comes from a totally different perspective. I think H&M, I think we had this great opening seminar with Kerr Rottenack, right, with the GGGI at GMEC, where you just hear how Rottenack tells the story. Solar can be very disturbing, and he mentions all the negative things, but at the same time, this letter that actually was sent by H&M and a few others really seemed to have changed their mind. Okay, we'll probably don't touch it, and you can just install some. So how to go forward? It is really difficult. I think there should just be something with climate change, or I think Energy Lab has actually this initiative to send a letter to Hansen directly. I think most of us have seen that, to actually really say like, hey, companies, really require a large part. And if they're growing, the solar is not really that much, and it can really benefit the economy as a general. So that I think the focus maybe should be a little bit less on the Ministry of Energy, because they're really focused in their own mind, and they don't see the wider benefits for Cambodia. So maybe Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Economic and Finance, and Ministry of Environment in all countries are the most weak ministries, I guess. But at least they can help in some way. But I think economic and finance, there are some very bright people there, but they have unfortunately not that much power yet over this market. So there, I think, is the solution, to really focus on Ministry of Commerce, saying how important it is for these companies. Race to zero, I really like that. I think it's a great over a one-liner. I think in Australia, they're working on it. How can we get a race to zero, and maybe change the mind that it is not required for EDC to earn more money. It's just required that they do a good job. And they've done, if you compare electricity systems in India, where you can almost kill yourself by every corner of the street to touch a medium voltage transformer, the system that the World Bank helped with EAC and EDC to set up actually created a quite good system and safe. The outages are not that bad compared to India. So they've done a great job compared to, of course, what everybody says, ground zero after the Khmer Rouge, right? There wasn't anything happening. So they've done, if you look at the medium voltage lines, they're very clean, very high, very safe. So that is already a very good job. But maybe, we can in some way find out that the goal should not necessarily need to be more money for EDC, but maybe just, to find other ministries that can actually mention, like, hey, we want to go join the race to zero. How many companies can actually join that, and how can EDC or EAC facilitate that in any way, that it becomes a challenge for any companies? And because there are so many bright young companies, I think Energy Lab also tries to set up and help these new young companies to set up with new technology and new IoT, to be much more technology minded and reduce energy more safer, integrate technologies, regions. Yeah, in that way, there could be so much growth in the economy, also by maybe reducing the amount of energy required. And with all these coal prices going up, we might really need to look into how we can actually use less energy. And maybe it's slightly more expensive, but maybe that is not even that important then.
Interesting, yeah, glimpse at all the complex political dynamics at play behind this, of course, and yes, and I think it's also a matter of finding not just finding ways around EDC, but also finding what makes it attractive for them. Right? You mentioned peak load, managing the peak loads, and yeah, I think the grid modernization work that's been ongoing. I think with AFT support should also think to ease some of the nervousness around the integrating more renewables. I think we're coming close to the end of our panel discussion. Any last comments from the panel? Any last questions from people online?
Again, thank you for this. I think just to follow on from Roger there, maybe what we're seeing with garment factories is also being seen more broadly in Cambodia. Next to the Prime Minister's house, there is a nice large solar farm. At least on one of the ministries now, they've installed rooftop solar. The water body of Phnom Penh has rooftop solar. Maybe we're finding the leverage points that will further make it attractive in Cambodia. And that everyone can then benefit from increasingly. So I'm increasingly optimistic on this point, which is, if anyone knows me, that's a strange thing for me to say. So awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. And I think I volunteered to summarize the discussion, but it's been so rich that I think I'm not even going to try. I want to end on Pete's optimistic note, and Richard also said something along those lines. Only a few years ago, three or 4 years ago, when some of us were already in Cambodia, we didn't even have regulation. Now we have evolving regulation, and there are things to be improved, but things are actually evolving